I married the aquarium's maintenance guy with 11 days left on my visa. 3 months later, the board approved $200,000 in emergency funding for my SEAL program, signed by the same name on our marriage certificate. Noah had some explaining to do. I found out on a Tuesday, standing in the staff office with a cup of coffee going cold in my hand, staring at an email that had been forwarded to me twice before anyone thought to check if I'd actually read it. The subject line said "Api Provid." The signature line said something else. I read it 4 times before the letters stopped rearranging themselves into a joke. Salt and bleach. That's what the office always smelled like, no matter how many candles the front desk lit for donor tours. I set my coffee down so I wouldn't drop it. Down the hall, through the glass, I could see him crouched by the filtration intake in his gray coveralls, exactly where he'd been every morning for 4 months, doing exactly the job I thought he had. I did not go find him right away. I needed a minute. I'd married a man for very practical reasons, and I was suddenly not sure anymore which reasons had been true. 11 days, that's the number that started this, and it's worth explaining where it came from. I'd moved to Cortez Cove 3 years earlier to work under Dr. Francis Odell, the only person in North American marine rehab who'd successfully hand-reared a stranded harbor seal pup with a spinal injury and gotten her back into open water. I was Canadian on a TN visa tied to my sponsor, a nonprofit called the Cascadia Marine Mammal Institute. Dr. Odell died of a stroke 14 months ago on a Thursday, in the middle of writing up a treatment plan for a seal named Pearl, who'd washed up half-starved with a fishing line wound around her flipper. I finished the treatment plan myself. I have never stopped finishing her sentences since. 9 months after that, Cascadia lost its last major grant and dissolved on a Friday afternoon with a 2-line email. My visa was tied to an employer that no longer existed. Immigration gives you a window when that happens, a grace period to find a new sponsor before you fall out of status. I burned through most of mine trying to get Meridian, the aquarium that absorbed Cascadia's rescue program, to sponsor me directly. Their board kept tabling the vote. Somewhere in there, my 60 days became 30 and my 30 became 11. I did not tell many people that. I told Pearl mostly because she was the only one who never asked follow-up questions I couldn't answer. Here's the thing nobody explains about training marine mammals: the connection isn't magic, it's specific. Dr. Odell kept a field notebook for every animal in her care, not on a tablet, an actual paper notebook, cheap and swollen with salt air, 1 page per animal in handwriting that got smaller when she was excited about something. I inherited the notebook along with the job. Pearl's page has a whistle pattern drawn out like sheet music, 4 notes, a cadence Dr. Odell worked out over 8 patient months. Pearl doesn't respond to the sound, she responds to that sound from someone who knows to hold the third note half a beat longer than the others. At the time of the wedding, I was the only living person who knew that. I did not think that detail would matter to anyone but a seal. I was wrong about that too. I met my husband because a pump failed at 11 at night. The seal pool's primary filtration line blew a seal, the rubber kind, on a Wednesday, and the backup system Meridian's board had been reviewing the budget for since March didn't exist yet. I was standing in 4 inches of water with a flashlight in my teeth when a man in gray coveralls let himself in through the service door like he owned the place, took one look at the intake valve, and said, "That's not the pump. That's the pressure relief. Somebody's been treating the symptom for a year." He was right. It took him 40 minutes to fix what Meridian's actual contracted vendor had failed to diagnose in 4 visits. "You're not on the maintenance roster," I said once Pearl's water was running clear again and my heart rate had returned to something legal. "I'm new." He didn't offer a last name. "Just Noah," said like a complete answer, and I let it be one, because half the trades guys I'd met were like that, private about the parts of themselves that weren't currently useful. He came back the next week to check the fix held. And the week after, to look at a corroded valve nobody had flagged. He'd crouch by Pearl's pool on his breaks and just watch her, quiet like he was doing math. "She only trusts you," he said once. "That's rare for an animal that's been hurt before." I told him that was just consistency, that animals don't forgive, they recalibrate. And if you're the one variable that stays the same long enough, eventually you become safe by default. He looked at me like I'd said something about myself I hadn't meant to. "If they try to cut this program," he said, not looking away from the water, "they'll have to go through me first." I remember laughing a little, because he was a maintenance contractor with a wrench in his back pocket, and the people who could actually cut the SEAL program sat on a board 40 miles away in blazers that cost more than his truck. I did not know yet how wrong I had that math. He overheard the call that changed everything, because I made the mistake of taking it in the break room instead of my car. 11 days, I was saying, to a friend back in Victoria, my voice doing the thing where it stays level, because the alternative is not staying level at all. 11 days, and then I have to leave the country, and there is no plan for who takes care of Pearl, because there is no plan, because I kept assuming the board would just do the obvious thing. I didn't hear the door. I heard him clear his throat, which was somehow worse. How married would you need to get, Noah said, to fix that? I laughed at him. It wasn't a kind laugh. He didn't laugh back. He pulled out the folding chair across from me, sat down like a man about to discuss a quote for parts, and said, I need to be married by my birthday, for reasons that are mine and boring and legal. You need to be married, or something adjacent to it, in the next 11 days, for reasons that are yours and not boring at all. I like you. I think you're good at your job in a way that matters. I'm asking you to consider this a business proposal, not a rescue. You're a maintenance contractor, I said. This isn't a business proposal, it's a felony waiting to happen. It's not if it's real enough, he said. Shared address, joint accounts, the kind of paperwork that holds up because there's nothing under it to find. I'm not asking you to love me. I'm asking you to let me help, and to let it look like I'm not just handing out charity, because I have my own reasons for needing this to look like a real marriage instead of a rescue. I want to say I thought about it for a respectable length of time. Really, I thought about it for the length of one more terrible fall to Victoria and one sleepless night with Pearl's page of the notebook open on my knees, the whistle pattern drawn out in Dr. Odell's excited handwriting, a reminder that some things don't come with a version of history where you waited for a better option. We married 8 days later, at the county clerk's office, in a room that smelled like toner, called forward by a clerk who said, the 2:15. I wore the same blazer I'd worn to Dr. Odell's funeral, because it was the only thing in my closet that felt like an occasion. He wore his coveralls, straight from a shift, he said, and I remember thinking that was either the most honest or the most elaborate thing a man had ever done for me. I signed my new marriage certificate without reading the top line closely. I was watching the clock, not the paper. Sutherland isn't a name that means anything at Meridian. The brand on every sign in that building says Meridian. Nobody on staff, not even the ones who'd worked there a decade, called the parent company anything but corporate, like it was weather. I filed the certificate in the same folder as Pearl's intake paperwork and didn't think about it again for 3 months. Married life, it turns out, has a very specific shape when it starts as a contract. We split a 2-bedroom rental 6 blocks from the water, a house that belonged, he said, to someone I do work for, which felt like a strange arrangement for a maintenance contractor and should have told me something. I took the smaller bedroom out of habit. He moved my things into the bigger one without asking, the same week, and didn't make a thing of it, which was somehow more unsettling than if he had. We built a marriage out of small, real evidence, because that was the part of the contract that had to hold up. He learned I take my coffee black except on days I've lost an animal, when I want it sweet enough to be embarrassing. I learned he reads the last page of a book first every time, because he says he can't relax into a story until he knows nobody he's rooting for gets betrayed by the ending. That's not how stories work, I told him. It's how I decide if they're worth my time, he said. I've had enough of the other kind. He caught me falling asleep over Pearl's observation logs more than once that first month, and instead of waking me, he'd finish the entry himself in his own blunt handwriting. Subject appears fine. Trainer needs sleep more than data tonight. I found the notes days later and never told him I'd seen them, because some kindnesses only work if you pretend not to notice. You're doing the smile again, he said one night, over dinner that was really just crackers and whatever was left in the fridge, the one where you decide something's fine before you've actually checked. I don't have a smile like that. You do. You did it about the pump, you did it about the funding. You're doing it right now, deciding this conversation is fine. Is it not? It's fine, he said and smiled the exact smile back at me, and I threw a cracker at him, and somewhere 3 miles away in a tank neither of us could see, Pearl had absolutely nothing to do with the fact that I laughed until my stomach hurt, for the first time in over a year. Some nights we didn't speak at all, just sat on opposite ends of the couch with our separate exhaustion, and it was, against every prediction I'd have made in that break room, comfortable. The board tabled the sponsorship vote twice more that fall, and twice more the finance office sent down a memo about restructuring underperforming programs, which was corporate for the SEAL wing. I stopped sleeping well. Noah started showing up earlier, staying later, fixing things that weren't broken yet. You don't have to do that, I told him the third time I caught him recalking a seam that had years left in it. I like fixing things before they're emergencies, he said. It's a character flaw. I laughed, actually laughed, for what felt like the first time since the funeral. He looked so pleased about it that I almost told him something true out loud right then, about what this had turned into for me. I didn't. I'd learned the hard way not to say things before they were load-bearing. Then, 3 months to the day after the county clerk's office, the email came through. APROVED, $200,000, emergency board allocation, sponsor line signed N. Sutherland. I stood in the staff office with cold coffee in my hand and did the math 4 times, the way you check a diagnosis you don't want to be right. I found him exactly where I always found him, crouched by Pearl's pool, and for once the sight of him there made me furious instead of fond. Sutherland, I said, and held up my phone so he could see the email. As in Sutherland Capital Partners, as in the company that owns Meridian and every aquarium north of San Diego, as in you. He didn't flinch, which almost made it worse. He stood up slowly, wiped his hands on his coveralls out of habit, and for the first time since I'd known him, the coveralls looked like a costume instead of clothes. Yes. You're not a contractor. I was, once, before my father died and I inherited a company I never grew up wanting. He said it flatly, like a fact he'd recited before, to someone who'd mattered less than I apparently did. I've been coming in as maintenance for 4 months, because I didn't trust the numbers corporate was sending me about this facility, and I wasn't going to get the truth in a blazer. You were the truth. This program runs on about 1/3 of what it should, because you make up the difference in unpaid hours, and nobody upstairs noticed, because you never once complained where they could hear it. There's a vendor account in the books too, one I can't match to any real company, bleeding a little more out every quarter. I haven't found where it goes yet, I intend to. That doesn't explain the marriage certificate. No, he agreed. It doesn't. I'll give you the real reason if you want it, and you can decide what to do with it after. He told me about the trust. His father, before he died, had structured it so Sutherland Capital's controlling shares stayed with Noah only if he was legally married by his 35th birthday, married in a way the trust's own auditors would recognize as a genuine household, not a paper shell. Miss the deadline, or have the marriage proven a sham and control reverted to a family trustee, his aunt. Vivian, he said, and something in his jaw changed shape saying it. She's run the company since my father died. She's good at it, in the ways that show up on a slide deck. She's also spent 2 years trying to arrange a marriage for me to a family friend's daughter, because it keeps the board and the money exactly where she likes it. I didn't want that marriage, I wanted this one. Those 2 facts landed at the same time. I used them both. I should have told you before the funding came through instead of after. That part is on me. I stood there, watching a man I'd learned to read by the shape of his silences turn out to have an entire second life I'd never been shown a single page of. Do you regret it? I asked. Marrying me instead of just telling me the truth and asking anyway? I regret the order, he said, not the choice. I didn't have an answer for that yet. I told him I needed a night to think, and he let me have it without arguing, which was its own kind of answer, if I'd been ready to hear it. There's a conversation I wasn't in the room for, one I only pieced together much later from a voicemail Noah forgot to delete. I'll tell it the way it happened, not the way I found out about it, because by the end of this you'll understand why the difference matters. Vivian Sutherland did not knock. She let herself into Noah's office at the Sutherland Capital Tower 2 days after the funding approval went through, wearing the kind of composure that costs more than the outfit under it. $200,000, she said, for a seal enclosure, approved the same quarter you married an employee I'd never heard of until the county recorder's office called my assistant by mistake. Explain the sequence to me, Noah, because from where I sit it looks like you laundered a personal indulgence through a conservation line item. The program was underfunded before I ever set foot in that building, Noah said. The funding stands on its own numbers. I'll walk you through the audit personally. I don't care about the audit. Vivian's voice didn't rise. It never rose. That was always the dangerous part. I care about a trust document that requires a genuine marriage examined by outside counsel before your birthday. You married a woman with 11 days left on a work visa. Do you understand how that reads to anyone who asks a single follow-up question? It reads exactly like what it is, Noah said. Real. It reads like a green card arrangement wearing a wedding dress, and if I can see that in one conversation, so can the trust's auditors, and so, eventually will federal immigration if anyone happens to mention it to them. A pause precisely timed. Camille has been very patient, Noah. Her family has been very patient. I'd hate for patience to run out over something this fixable. It's not fixable. I'm not leaving my wife to make your merger easier. Everyone is fixable, Vivian said, given the right pressure in the right place. I'd start thinking about where yours is. She left without raising her voice once. That was always how you knew Vivian was serious. The people who loved her called it composure. The people who'd been on the other end it called it something else. Back in Cortez Cove, I didn't know any of that yet. What I knew was that I'd decided, somewhere in that sleepless night, to stay married to him for reasons that had stopped being about paperwork weeks earlier, and that I felt, for about 4 days, something dangerously close to settled. Camille Ashworth found me on the 4th day, in the gift shop of all places, standing in front of the plush seals like she'd been waiting for me specifically. You must be the wife, she said in a tone that made the words sound like a job title she found funny. I'm an old family friend. Vivian speaks about you constantly. A pause exact as a scalpel, not kindly, but constantly. I told her I didn't have time for whatever this was. She held out a folded sheet of paper anyway, the kind of gesture that only works if you're too curious to refuse it, and I was. It was an internal memo, dated 6 weeks before I ever met Noah, printed on Sutherland capital letterhead. The subject line read Cortez Cove Facility Optics. Halfway down, one line sat highlighted in yellow, trainer profile strong for PR if marriage proceeds as discussed. He was scouting you, Camille said, before he ever picked up a wrench in that building. I just thought you deserved to know what you actually married, a strategy, with very good instincts about which employee would photograph well as a devoted wife. I did not cry in the gift shop. I want that on the record. I made it to the parking lot first. I've gone back over that memory more times than I'd like to admit, trying to find the exact moment I stopped trusting the last 4 months I'd built for myself. It wasn't the memo itself. It was how easily it fit a shape I'd already half believed about myself, the shape where I'm the girl useful things happen to, not the girl things happen for. I didn't go home that night. I told Noah I was covering an overnight observation shift for Pearl, which was half true, and slept on the cot in the back office instead, staring at Dr. Odell's notebook without opening it, because I didn't trust myself to read her handwriting without falling apart entirely. She only trusts you, he'd said months ago, watching Pearl circle back to me instead of the interns. I thought it was a compliment. Now I couldn't stop hearing it as a data point, filed somewhere in a building I'd never been invited into. The letter from immigration came 9 days later. An anonymous tip, it said, had raised concerns about the bona fides of my marriage, and I was being scheduled for a Stokes interview, a joint interview where they separate you and your spouse into different rooms and ask the same 100 small questions, on the theory that a real marriage answers them the same way by accident, and a fake one falls apart, trying to remember the script. I hadn't told Noah about the memo yet. I told him about the letter instead, because it was the kind of emergency that made the other kind of hurt feel briefly optional. Whose toothbrush is on the left side of the sink? He read over my shoulder off the sample questions, and for 1 second he almost laughed, and then he saw my face and didn't. This isn't going to go well for whoever sent this. I'm going to find out who. I already know who, I said and told him about the gift shop. Something closed behind his eyes at Camille's name, and something else worse, when I told him what the memo said, because he didn't ask to see it. He just went very still and said, I never wrote a memo like that. I need you to believe that before I even try to prove it. I wanted to. Wanting to and managing it turned out to be 2 different exercises. My colleague Dana Whitfield noticed I'd stopped eating lunch in the break room and started eating it on the loading dock instead, and found me there on a Thursday with 2 coffees and the specific patience of someone who'd decided not to ask what was wrong until I was ready to volunteer it. Vivian called again this morning, she said, not looking at me, stirring a coffee that didn't need stirring, just checking in on program logistics. She does that a lot lately. She calls you? Started a few months back, after the ownership transition, she said, wanting eyes on the ground during the restructuring conversation. Dana shrugged too casually. I didn't think much of it. She asked normal things. Attendance, morale, whether the funding's actually landing where it's supposed to. I filed that away without understanding yet what I was filing. I had bigger fires. The board had scheduled an emergency session for the following week, and the agenda item, forwarded to me by a sympathetic finance clerk, reads simply, Cortez Cove Marine Mammal Program, Continued Viability Review. Vivian chaired that meeting from a screen, remote, unbothered, in a blazer the exact color of money. She used the word instability 4 times in 11 minutes, and precision, her favorite word, twice more, always aimed at line items, never at me directly. I want to be clear, this isn't personal, she said, to a conference room full of people who all understood, instantly, that it was. But a program this dependent on one employee's continued, uninterrupted legal status isn't a program. It's a liability with a mascot. Nobody laughed. A few people looked at their laptops like the laptops had said something interesting. She never once said the word marriage. She didn't have to. Everyone in that room had somehow already read the same immigration letter that, despite being addressed to a federal agency, had found its way into 3 inboxes with no business having it. The donor preview happened 2 days before the interview, an evening thing with wine in plastic cups dressed up as glass. I was there in my one blazer again, working the room, because Dana said the optics mattered, and Vivian was there in person for once, which should have told me something about how high the stakes had climbed. She found me near the seal tank, of course. She always found people near the thing she was about to take from them. Ms. Calder, she said, pleasant, pitched exactly loud enough for the 2 donors beside us to hear without appearing to try. I have to say, I admire the commitment. Most people manage a green card with a marriage. You managed one with a wetsuit. The donors laughed, the uncertain kind of laugh people do when they're not sure they're allowed to. My face went hot, and then, strangely, cold. I had spent 3 years in that building absorbing things. Budget cuts I covered with unpaid hours. A mentor's death I finished alone. A husband's secret I'd been carrying for 2 weeks without telling a soul, because I kept thinking that if I just held still long enough, it would stop being true. I did not hold still this time. Pearl, I said loud enough that 3 heads turned, responds to exactly one whistle pattern from exactly one person, because trust isn't something you fake your way into. I'd think you, of all people, would recognize the difference between something real and something performed for a room. You've had enough practice arranging the second kind. Vivian's smile didn't move, her eyes. I walked away before she could recover, which was, I'd learned, the first mistake she hadn't planned for. I went home that night and told Noah everything, the memo, Camille. The version of myself I'd let Vivian's math shrink me down to for 2 weeks. I should have told you about the trust the day I found out about your visa, he said. Instead you found out from an invoice. I can't undo that. I can help you fight what happens next if you'll let me as your husband, and not as a rescue. I don't need rescuing, I said. I need a plan. We built one at the kitchen table, the same table where he'd learned I take my coffee sweet on bad days. Dr. Odell's notebook, entered as proof of a real, specific, 3-year working life that predated Noah by 2.5 years, undercutting any story where I'd been engineered for a role. Household records, joint accounts, the unglamorous paper trail of 2 people who actually lived together, argued about the thermostat, split grocery runs. And, if I could get it, whatever Vivian had actually done to plant that memo and place that tip. Because a real marriage doesn't need much defending, but a sabotaged one does. I went to Dana first, because I'd rather lose a friend by asking a hard question than lose everything by not asking it. Vivian's calls, I said. Did she ever ask about my visa status specifically? Dates, deadlines, anything like that? Dana went very quiet, the kind of quiet that answers a question before the mouth catches up. She asked when your interview was scheduled, she said finally. 2 weeks before the letter came, I told her I didn't know. I checked the shared calendar to be helpful, and then I did know, and I think I mentioned it next time she called, because she asked so casually, and I didn't think it was a weapon, I thought it was a woman doing her job. She stopped, her hands were shaking. I forwarded her an email, she said. About the interview date. I forwarded it because she was on an approved distribution list for program updates, and I never checked that the list was current, and I've felt sick for a week without knowing exactly why. Now I know exactly why. I could have been angrier than I was. I chose not to be because Dana's face already held more punishment than I could have added. You're going to help me fix it, I said. Not because I'm letting you off easy. Because you're the only person who can prove where that date actually came from. She nodded before I finished the sentence. Separately, I asked the aquarium's youngest volunteer, a college kid named Marcus Bell who ran the donor-facing Seal Cam livestream, whether the overnight audio ever got archived anywhere. Every second, he said. Compliance thing, left over from the old Cascadia days. Nobody's ever thought to check it for anything except animal welfare logs. I thought about the seal tank and every conversation Vivian had ever had standing next to it, certain nobody who mattered was listening. We didn't talk about the gala much in the days before it. We talked about smaller things instead, the way you do when the big thing is too large to hold for long without dropping something. If this goes badly, I said one night, watching him fix a hinge that wasn't broken, I want you to keep funding the program anyway. Whatever happens to us. He set the screwdriver down like the question deserved his whole hand. That's not the kind of thing I need you to ask me twice. I'm asking anyway. Then I'm answering anyway. Yes, always. That was never the part of this that was conditional. He came and sat next to me on the floor, back against the cabinet, close enough that our shoulders touched, and for a while neither of us said anything else, and it was, I noted, the third or fourth time that particular silence had turned out to be the safest place in the house. For what it's worth, he said eventually, I'd have married you anyway, even without the trust. I want that on the record too before Tuesday. I didn't have a clever answer for that. I just leaned my head against his shoulder and let it be the answer instead. The gala fell 6 days later, on Noah's 35th birthday, the same night as the emergency board funding vote, and by a scheduling coincidence Vivian clearly hadn't planned for and hated, the night before my immigration interview. Every clock I'd been racing against for 4 months finally rang at once. Vivian opened the evening with a line about responsible stewardship during a period of transition, which was corporate for I intend to win tonight. She'd arranged, without asking me, for Meridian's head office trainer to run Pearl's evening demonstration instead of me, to show the program's institutional strength beyond any single employee, she said, smiling at the donors like she hadn't smiled at anyone all week. I found Noah backstage. She's going to use tonight to prove I'm replaceable and the marriage is fake, in the same breath, in front of everyone who signs the checks. Then we make sure she's wrong about both, he said. The demonstration went first. The substitute, a perfectly competent trainer named Iris Holt who'd worked with 100 seals and never once met Pearl, gave the 4-note whistle exactly as it was written on a laminated card someone in corporate had photographed from the notebook without my permission. Pearl looked at her, Pearl looked at the water, Pearl did not move. Vivian's smile held 4 seconds too long. Perhaps she needs a moment, Vivian said to a room that had started to murmur. I hadn't planned to do it in front of everyone. I did it anyway, walked to the edge of the tank in my one blazer and gave the same 4 notes Iris had, except I held the third one half a beat longer, the way Dr. Odell had written it 8 patient, unglamorous months in, long before anyone photographed it for a donor deck. Pearl surfaced immediately and swam straight to me. Somewhere in the crowd, a donor I didn't recognize said loud enough to carry, "Well, that settles that," and the room laughed, the real kind this time, the kind that isn't waiting for permission. The applause was loud enough that it took a second for anyone to notice Marcus had walked onto the small stage carrying a laptop, looking apologetic and terrified in equal measure. I need to show the board something, he said, and I think it needs to happen now, because it's already on 400 screens that aren't ours. The seal cam had been live the entire cocktail hour, the way it was every hour of every day, and its audio, recorded the way it had been recorded without incident for years, had picked up a conversation from 40 minutes earlier. 2 women standing at the edge of the tang, the only witness nearby had flippers. Marcus hadn't leaked it, he hadn't needed to. A dozen regular viewers of the donor livestream, the same devoted strangers who watched Pearl eat breakfast every morning because they liked the quiet reliability of it, had already clipped and posted it themselves before anyone at Meridian even knew to look. Vivian's voice, unmistakable, telling Camille that the immigration tip had done exactly what it needed to, that the memo had done its job even faster than expected, that the interview timing had been no accident, thanks to a very helpful assistant trainer, and that once the marriage collapsed under its own weight, The board would have no choice but to revert control, and your family gets its merger after all, just with better paperwork this time. The memo Camille had handed me in the gift shop, I understood then, hadn't been a leaked truth. It had been manufactured, letterhead and all, timed to land exactly when I was already tired enough to believe the worst about myself. The room went the specific kind of silent that isn't peaceful. Dana stepped forward before I had to ask her to, laptop already open, forwarding the original chain that showed exactly when and from whom the interview date had traveled, timestamps lining up with Vivian's calls with a precision that no longer looked like coincidence to anyone in that room. Vivian tried, for a moment, the composure that had worked on every hard conversation of her adult life. It did not survive being played back at donor gala volume. "This is a private conversation, taken wildly out of context," she said. "You were standing next to a camera that's been live for 6 years, Noah said. "Context isn't the problem." The board didn't need a second vote. The emergency funding was confirmed unanimously within the hour alongside a motion, proposed by a trustee I'd never once spoken to remove Vivian from her position pending formal review, a review that would, I'd learn weeks later, eventually lay on the desk of the State Attorney General's Charities Division. Once the donor funds Vivian had been quietly routed through a shell vendor for 2 years came to light in the same audit Noah had started as a maintenance contractor with a clipboard and a bad cover story. Camille left before the applause finished, her family's name already being quietly separated from Vivian's in every conversation happening around the bar. Nobody stopped her. Nobody needed to. Noah found me by the tank once the room had mostly emptied, my hands still faintly damp from the water, Dr. Odell's notebook tucked under my arm, because I'd brought it as evidence and never once needed to open it. "You didn't need the notebook," he said. "I know. I brought it anyway. Some things you carry for luck, not proof." He didn't say anything else. He just took my free hand, the notebook still trapped between us, and we stood there a while longer, watching Pearl's slow, unbothered laps in water that, for the first time in 4 months, nobody was arguing about. My interview the next morning took 40 minutes. The officer asked which side of the sink my toothbrush was on. I knew. Noah knew. We'd never once needed to rehearse it. We went back to the dock behind the aquarium that evening, after the officer's stamp and the board's unanimous vote and Vivian's name already scrubbed from the website's leadership page, and sat at the edge with our feet not quite reaching the water, the way we had the very first night I ever really talked to him, before either of us had told the other the truth about anything. Pearl surfaced once, checked that it was actually me, and went back to whatever a seal does at dusk when nobody's grading her for it. "What do you want?" Noah asked. "Not what you need, not what fixes something. What do you actually want, now that you don't have to earn any of it?" I'd been asked easier questions under oath. "I want to stop introducing you as my husband like it's a fact I'm still getting used to," I said. "I want a version of this where the marriage came first and the paperwork was just paperwork, and I know we can't go back and make that true, but I'd like to start living like it is, starting now." He didn't say anything clever back. He took my hand, the same rough hand that had fixed a filtration line at 11 at night for a woman he wasn't required to help, and held it like a fact he intended to keep true on purpose, every day, without a deadline attached. Somewhere behind us, the aquarium's lights clicked over to their evening setting, warm instead of clinical, the way they did every night at exactly this hour for exactly no one in particular. Tonight, for once, they were for us. 11 days, that's how long it took to marry him. I stopped counting the days after that, because for the first time since Dr. Odell died, I didn't need to know how many were left. I already had the one that mattered. Did she go far enough, or was she still too merciful? Comment justice if the ending was perfect. Comment harder if you wanted an even colder revenge. Your comments decide how ruthless the next ending should be. Like and subscribe if you want to be here for the next story.